Hi, I'm Carol the Coach, aka Carol Driven Cheats, and you know what? I'm getting ready to start my radio show in about 20 minutes. But one of the things that I knew is that it's important for you as a sex addict to find out more about what is going on with your head, your heart, and your soul. And I thought tonight what I would do is talk to you about the different types of addiction. You know, Patrick Carnes talks about this so well in Out of the Shadows. He talks about there being 3 types of sexual addiction. Well, actually, there's about 20 types, but these 3 things get activated in the brain, and I'm going to ask you to decide which one it is. And if you're like a lot of addicts, you'll say, well, Carol, it might be 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3, but there should be a primary reward center hit. You know, sexual addiction is about the brain. You may feel that it's an immoral action, and it is, but it's not about you being immoral. It is about you getting involved in a behavior that has escalated to the point that you can't control it. You can't stop it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it by yourself. So this is what I promise you. If you're trying to handle this by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, you're wasting your time. Now we know it is a brain dysfunction, and here's how it works. When you have participated in behavior long enough that it becomes uncontrollable, you have activated 3 types of experiences in your brain. The first one might be the arousal center. And what that really means is in that reward center, there is arousal that occurs. Now, arousal usually has to do with high stimulation, high risk, grandiose intensity and frequency. You know, you want that intense rush. You want that intense hit. And so you do things that are not only out of control, but they have a certain element of risk and taboo that is part of the excitement of sexual addiction. Now, if you think back, it may be that you've always been an intensity or an adrenaline junkie. Adrenaline means that you love experiencing that rush. That's what lights up the reward center. So not only does it have to do with sexual addiction, it has to do with that adrenaline that comes with the sexual addiction. For so many people, they say, you know, Carol, it wasn't the sex that I was addicted to. It was going to areas that were very undesirable and risky where I could seek out a prostitute. Or it was stopping my car and having sex on the interstate on the hood of the car because it provided a rush. A lot of times, people that have that type of arousal intensity also do drugs that stimulate. They do meth, they do coke, they do crack. They participate in things that actually stimulate their brain and keep them hyped up. So ask yourself, do I have an arousal addiction? Now, the second type of addiction is fantasy addiction. And for people that are addicted to the fantasy, they have quite the imagination. And when they look at porn or they're with a prostitute, they are saying to themselves, you know, how can I blow this up? How can I make this bigger than it is? How can I anticipate what's going to happen and experience the rush of the fantasy? You know, so many of my addicts that I work with, if they are experiencing fantasy, they can't have an erection. They don't have an orgasm. because it's the fantasy that they're addicted to. It's not really going to a prostitute's home where there are needles all around, or her fingernails are dirty, or it's way different than what they imagined and anticipated. So I got to ask you, when you are thinking about acting out, is part of that reward the story you make up about what is going to happen? That is so important to know. Because if that's the case, it's more than likely that you're addicted to fantasy. And that's really tough because, our imagination is what keeps us really excited about a new job, a new baby, and a wife, a husband. And then the reality sets in, and in healthy relationships, those two mesh. It's not exactly like the fantasy, but the intimacy that you get replaces that fantasy. But in sexual addiction, there is no intimacy. It's only fantasy, and that's very, very tough. So think about the way you've acted out in the past and ask yourself, did I get what I want, or was my idea of what I hoped to get better than the actual experience? And if that's the case, you probably had a fantasy addiction. Now, the last type of reward hit in the brain that changes the neuroplasticity is numbing. And oftentimes, people that numb go into a behavior that actually checks them out of the world. They disassociate, they go into altered state, and they very clearly numb themselves from the real reality of what life is. Oftentimes, numbing can be accompanied by drugs that help to depress the system and slow it down and numb them even further. That might be marijuana, that might be alcohol, that might be any kind of opiate or downer. So sometimes those drugs fuse to make numbing even more enhanced. And if you're involved in the addiction that numbs, typically, like I said, is pornography, because you can watch porn for 20 minutes or you can watch it for 6 hours. You just kind of go into that altered state and you don't give it up. Or you give it up for a minute and then you go back to it and then it's another 3 hours. That's somebody who really wants to escape. They want to escape their real life and they want to just numb out, dull all their senses. Does that sound like you? Are you somebody who wants to numb out to avoid the reality of what's going on in your life? Well, the good news is, if your arousal template is activated, or your fantasy template, or that numbing out and just absolutely not dealing with life template is activated, you can fix that by replacing any of those really intense experiences with experiences that actually promote intimacy. Okay, that means that you get into a 12-step group, or Smart Recovery, or Recovery Nation, and you embrace the tools, you connect with the guys or women, depending on who's a sex addict, and you substitute what you were getting with intimacy, which brings you another kind of high. What we know about arousal is that it activates dopamine. And what we know about connection is it activates oxytocin. And so those are two very different chemicals, but they're very intense and they're very addictive. Now, I love dopamine, but what do I do for dopamine? I rollerblade, I travel, I listen to music, I paddleboard, I get out in the boat, I hang out with friends. I do whatever it takes to make me feel happy. So that's your assignment. What do you do that you enjoy that actually gives you a buzz? It makes you feel happy in a natural way. I want you to list about 10 things. And then I'm going to ask you, hey, what do you do to feel close to people? What do you do to feel a sense of belonging? What do you do to feel a sense of connection? I'd like for you to list about 10 things that you actually do to improve that sense of connection. Because when you substitute old addictive behaviors with healthy dopamine and oxytocin behaviors, I can't tell you how powerful that is. For a while, it may not feel like it's as good as, but I guarantee you, like Patrick Carnes says, you know what? You can't beat this addiction by yourself. You got to have your committee. You got to replace the behaviors. You got to feel the suffering. You got to feel better. And then you got to give back. And it supports my belief that when you are in good recovery, you are 95% better than the rest of the world. So I can't encourage you enough to get recovery, to do the hard work, and to live life to its fullest in a way that maintains your integrity. I'm Carol Jurgensen-Sheets, aka Carol the Coach, and hey, now it's 10 till 9, and I do a radio show, blogtalkradio.com/Sex Help with Carol the Coach. It's probably the oldest show on the air, on the internet, that deals with sex addiction and partner trauma. And if you found my YouTubes, I expect you to go and listen to the show. Subscribe for free and find those episodes that speak to you. Have a great night, and I'll catch you here in about 10 minutes for the show.